Welcome to Theology Thursday, a podcast dedicated to cultivating theological conversation amongst millennials. I'm your host, Ryan Mock.
I'm your co-host, Connor Grubbs.
And I'm your co-host, Johnny Grubbs.
Oh, hi, Johnny. Why do you sound so different today? Johnny's not with us today. He's going to be in and out for the next 2.5 months. He has a baby child on the way.
What?
Yeah. And then when the baby child arrives, he's actually going to be just straight up gone for 2 months.
Wow, what a loser.
Not on the podcast at all. I think it's a pretty lame excuse. But you know what it means? Here's what it means, Ryan. This is good for us. It means he's not going to be here in October, which is Reformation Month. And he's not Reformed like we are.
He's basically Catholic.
We get to kind of kick him out and do a series on Reformed theology. And on the Reformation in general, the history of the Reformation. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah.
It'll be really fun. And so that's nice. So he's not here tonight, which is, it's always better without him. The show started without him.
And it will end without him.
And it will end without him inevitably.
You mean nothing to us.
Whatever the last episode is, we're making sure you're not a part of it.
We're just going to, in all of our episodes, we're going to edit out whenever you talk.
No, we're just kidding. We enjoy having you on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was your day, Connor?
My day was interesting. I'm just kind of doing an odd summer job for the summer, and
is this the one where you're waxing floors?
It is the one where I'm waxing floors.
I used to do that last summer.
So I have something else lined up for the fall, which I can't wait to tell everybody on the podcast about. But we're just we're waiting for a better time.
Wait, what is it?
I can't tell you. I just said we're waiting.
But I'm the host.
But you already know.
Oh, do I know it? Whisper it in my ear.
No.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
There you go. So, it's kind of exciting, though. I do look forward to sharing more about that. And then we practiced for worship for a thing. And it was kind of stressful because we played 9 songs and we didn't have a lot of time.
Wait, what was this for?
Mission Impact.
Oh, I'm sad I'm not going to be there.
Yeah, you're not. I'm sad you're not going to be there either. But at least we have right now. Together.
And we have each other.
And we have each other for this moment.
We have each other, and that's all that matters.
We just lost all of our listeners. Please never do that again.
Rawr.
All right, so
you're not going to ask me how my day was.
Oh, how was your day, Ryan?
I went to the dentist today.
This is even more boring than mine.
It turned out I have one cavity. I need to get my wisdom teeth removed, and I'm going to need braces to take down my canine teeth.
Oh, you're going to need braces? Are you going to do the Invisalign stuff?
I don't know yet. We'll have to see about costs and is it even possible. And
right. Your canines have always bothered me, so I'm glad
they bothered me too.
So, knock on wood here, but I've never had a cavity in my life. Not bragging, just saying.
Yeah, I've been pretty good about my teeth, but today I was told that I have one cavity, and it should be an easy fix.
Cool.
So, and then after that, I stayed around the house, and then I had youth group tonight. And the way the Tradewinds does youth group, we don't have a permanent building, and so we go house to house.
Okay.
So tonight, we went to a person's house, and I was the only other person to show up.
Really?
Yes.
Wait, so no youth, just the person who owned the house?
The person who owns the house and their children.
Okay.
And me, and that was it. But I understand why we had... Okay, Tradewinds has a very tiny youth group.
Okay.
And so we only have 4 or 5 families. Tonight, 3 families were on vacation.
Oh, there you go.
It's not like they don't like us or they're tired of youth group, but they're actually away.
Right, because it's 4th of July weekend.
Yes, and so I was talking with I just kind of hung out at their house, and they bought pizza, so
that's always
we
a
ate
plus.
Pizza. I talked to the parents. They're cool people. Actually, you would like one of them a lot. We talked about short-term missions a little bit,
that's interesting.
And what her opinion on was it, and your opinions align very much.
Well, we're gonna have an episode on that sooner or later. So we've done global and local missions, but we need to do short-term and long-term because I do have many thoughts on that.
You have many thoughts. I've heard all of them.
And and that will be a good episode. I'm prepared for that one, unlike the one tonight. But we shouldn't have told our audience that.
Yeah, we know exactly what we're talking about, by the way.
No, so actually, this is one of those episodes where I got to give a disclaimer, even though people should already know because we've made this clear as our mission from the start. We are not the experts on any of the things that we talk about.
By no means.
And that's not the purpose of this show. It is to cultivate theological conversations amongst millennials. And that being said, when we start theological conversations, so our goal, when we say cultivate, it's just a fancy way. We want to start the conversation, okay? And just because you started a conversation doesn't mean everything you say in it's going to be correct, okay? So I want to be clear up front. There may be things said in today's episodes or in any of the past episodes or any of the future episodes that we go back and later and we're like, oh, you know what, we weren't right about that.
Yeah, I imagine that will probably happen.
This is not a systematic theology, this show. It is conversations. We want to start the conversation, and that's why we want you guys to use our Twitter and our email and things like that to engage, because we want you to be part of that conversation. So much of what we have to say today is actually opinion. Some opinions I have much stronger than others. It's an important topic, though, and I think this will be released the day after July 4th, which is July 5th.
The day after the 4th.
Yeah. Post-Independence Day. It's being recorded on Independence Day Eve. So just in light of that, I thought it would be interesting to talk about nationalism.
Ooh.
Nationalism. So Ryan, what is nationalism?
Actually, I was going to ask you that question.
You're going to ask me that question?
Yeah, so let's start over. Connor, what is nationalism?
So we got to... okay. The real question I want to ask, and it's the title of today's episode, so if you clicked it, you know what we're talking about. Is nationalism a sin? Okay, now to properly answer that question, we need to properly define nationalism.
Yes. This could be a whole argument about semantics, honestly. How do we define nationalism? I do think it's appropriate. I think it's necessary to distinguish a difference between nationalism and patriotism. So I think when we talk about nationalism, I think a lot of us are actually talking about patriotism. Patriotism is loyalty to your country. Okay. So we sing the Star Spangled Banner, and you fly an American flag, and you shed a little tear.
Right, as a bald eagle flies in the background. As a
bald eagle flies in the background. Nationalism, on the other hand, or at least when I think of nationalism, I think it is the belief that your country is superior to all others.
Yeah, so you've done a good job, and sometimes people will they'll kind of mesh both of those together.
Yes.
Okay? They can kind of intertwine, but it's important to know the difference, because that nationalism, that kind of our country is superior to other countries kind of thing, that's what we want to address today, is this kind of really rooting your identity.
Identity, and it's something you idolize.
Correct. Well, we don't have to finish the podcast anymore. You just skip to the point. It's something you idolize. So you did get to the point there. I want to ask another question before we really get into that, and that's, Ryan, would you consider America a Christian nation?
No.
Explain why.
Okay, so first off, the way our government... Okay, so I have many reasons. First off, the way our government is set up, it does not allow us to be a Christian nation. Why? We live in a republic, and we elect representatives. This is not a theocracy. This is not a monarchy. So we elect our representatives, and those representatives could have any religion because the Constitution protects all of these religions. You have free speech and you have freedom of religion, and the Constitution does not sanction a specific religion. So in the very definition of our Constitution, we are not a Christian nation. On a broader scope, and looking past government, in society, I think it is quite apparent as a nation we are not Christian. We are very much secular. One of the big things that bothers me is the idea that God is rooting for us.
Mm-hmm.
God has a special plan for America, yet abortion is legalized.
Right.
We're murdering babies, thousands of babies a day. I think the number's up to like 55 million babies murdered since Roe versus Wade.
Right.
That's disgusting and it's evil. Why would God be on our side?
Right. And we, for whatever, and mostly selfish reasons, justify that as morally okay, but still condemn the Holocaust of World War II.
Abortion is the American Holocaust.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because a lot of people kind of mix their patriotism in with their Christianity and bring that patriotism into the church. And in a big way, it's become a part of church culture in America.
Which is really weird to me.
It is very, very odd. And like the Christians have chosen their party, right? If you're a good conservative Christian, you're a Republican. And all this stuff, it's very, very odd. And in preparation for tonight's discussion, I was reading a book called "Is God on America's Side" by Erwin W. Lutzer. Spoiler alert: the answer is no. Because what he says at the end is God is not on any nations. No nation can say that God is on their side as a nation.
Yes, that's honestly, that's true.
Because no nation has that covenant that ancient Israel had in the Old Testament. That's the only nation that God was on their side, right? And some people might get into theology that God's still on their side and Israel's still the superior nation. I think they need to reread the Bibles.
Yeah,
if they think
we don't believe that.
We don't.
Also, the other thing to point out is American Christianity does have a very strange obsession with Israel as well. If you just have to look at politics in America. I think there's a deep root in America, that dispensational theology that idolizes Israel.
Yeah.
Just another thought.
So it's super interesting because the gospel that Jesus preached was one that included all nations. That was the thing that was so revolutionary about the gospel that Jesus preached, is that the Jews were expecting somebody to come and free them from the Roman government. It was all about the government and their nation. Whereas Jesus came and said, no, I'm here to free everybody, Jew and Gentile, from their sin.
It's a chosen people that transcends boundaries and race and ethnicity.
Exactly. So, let me say this. God isn't on any nation's side. He's on the church's side. Right? Because it's his church. I mean, I'm sitting here right now with my U.S. Army service tumbler. It's got a bald eagle.
I was kind of looking at that.
And I actually contemplated going into the Army for a while. And I realized there were a lot of theological questions that came with it that I was not prepared for. Like, is it okay for me to swear an oath to my country and be willing to kill people for it? Like, ultimately I came to the conclusion, I think that's not just a yes or no question.
Right.
It is far more complicated than that.
And then you have to get into just war theory. Like, what would you do if America got into a war that maybe isn't just? Would you fight in it?
Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of complicated questions that come with being an American and also being a Christian, and where there's conflict. That being said, let me say I have great respect for our military.
I do too.
And I feel a tremendous burden to do ministry for our military, and it's something that I found, there's just kind of the assumption that the majority of people in the military are just out there like shooting people, and actually it's the minority of military jobs that are infantry. There's so many other things that our military does. And they're hard workers, they're smart people, and they do deserve respect, but it's something we turn into idolatry. So that's what she came back to, is nationalism, saying that our nation is superior, is idolatry. But here's where the church comes in. We say our nation's superior because it's a Christian nation. That's what so many people think. And just because it was founded on Christian principles does not mean that it's inherently a Christian nation. Because the whole purpose was that it would be a country of religious freedom.
Right.
And it's better that way. I would rather that than a Christian nation.
Right.
A Christian government.
Right. I agree. I don't think God designed it to be that way.
Right.
And so I think that what we have set up now is ideal.
Right, because one's salvation can't be decided by their government. That's between them and God. So giving people the freedom to study and come to the conclusions about what they believe, right, based on those studies, people deserve that basic freedom, right?
Right, and you just need to look at history to know this basic truth. Look at all of these state-sanctioned religions and all the so-called Christian nations. Those don't generally turn out well in many different ways. And just beyond that, church, or let me phrase this right, state-sanctioned Christianity is generally a pretty lame Christianity.
Yeah.
Nobody really takes it seriously, or it's not the true gospel. It's usually some kind of legalism, or it's like you got to go to church on every Sunday. So, I go to church every Sunday because that's what the state wants me to do,
Yeah.
And those are my expectations.
Right.
And so what you get is cultural Christianity.
Right.
Cultural Christianity is usually turns into carnal Christianity, and carnal Christianity is not Christianity at all.
Right. And it's so easy, we've seen with communist takeovers and things like that in history, for the government to take the church because they know that it's important to the community and use it for their own purposes.
Yes, that's the other side. And you see in China, China has a state-sanctioned, they have state-sanctioned churches. And if you hear stories from Chinese Christians, those churches are not preaching the truth.
Right.
It is the underground church in China that is preaching the truth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, it's interesting because he takes the title of this book, Is God on America's Side, from when somebody asked Abraham Lincoln, do you think God's on your side? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, this might not be the exact quote, but I'm paraphrasing, he said, it matters not if God is on my side. The important thing is that I'm on God's side because God is always right.
Okay.
So, interesting answer. Basically what he's saying is it doesn't matter if God's trying to make sure my plan works out. I need to be seeing what does God say, because he's right. Whatever he's saying is correct, and I got to follow that instead. And I think that ought to be our attitude, right? One of obedience rather than us expecting God to bless us. We say, it's still in inauguration speeches and all this stuff just because it's kind of part of the history of our country is God bless America. But if you look at the Bible and you look at the nature of God, yes, God is our Father, but he's also our Lord and our Judge. And he has just as much a right and the power to curse us as he does to bless us. And he has done this to nations, and he has both blessed and cursed nations at the same time in different ways throughout the history, throughout the Bible. You see that.
If you want my opinion here, and this is probably a controversial opinion for many American evangelicals, but I'm under the conviction that God is going to judge America for our sins, our collective sins, abortion being one of them.
Well, I think even if not an active curse is already upon the country, I do believe that God has lifted his hand of blessing off of it. And I believe that in our prosperity and in our affluence, that Satan has utilized that to create a very different kind of spiritual warfare in our nation than is being experienced in other nations. You go to villages in Africa and places like this, and people are actually getting possessed by demons and having these very surreal kind of, we hear about them, we're like, what on earth? The fact is, the enemy doesn't need that here because we have technology and money and other idols to worship.
Yeah.
And that's something I feel very strongly about. So here is another question that comes with all this, because we've gone a lot of different directions. There's a lot of different rabbit trails you can go on when asking this question. It is a big question. So one way that a Christian might respond to this, well, okay, my ultimate alliance is to God, is to the church. Then should I participate in politics at all? Right? We talked about the difficulty of aligning should you participate in the military. There are so many people in our army who are devout Christians. And you can be a devout Christian and serve in the army. Like, there's a lot of nuanced questions that come with that. And case by case, it's going to be different. But yes, you can be a devout Christian and also serve in the army.
Absolutely.
Okay. So can you be a devout Christian and be involved in politics and vote and do all these things? Because there's not going to be a candidate or a party that completely honors God or completely goes by His word. So how do you handle that? Should Christians, here's the question, should Christians be involved in politics? Should Christians vote? Should Christians do these things?
Absolutely. I've done a little bit of reading, not in preparation for this podcast episode, but just in my own studies. Look up a guy by the name of Abraham Kuyper. Abraham Kuyper was a 19th century Dutch politician, and he was a Christian, and he had some interesting ideas. One of his ideas is known as sphere sovereignty. What this concept is that in our lives and in society, we have different spheres of influence and different spheres of social circles and topics. For example, we have the sphere of the church. That's where all the church stuff happens. We have the sphere of education or school. You go to school. That's another part of your life. You have the sphere of government, politics, in the state. You have the sphere of arts, and you have the sphere of science. Now, what a lot of Christians do is they act like a Christian in their church sphere, but they don't act like a Christian in their other spheres. But if we have a proper understanding of the call of a Christian, we need to understand that we need to submit all these spheres to the lordship of Christ. And so what Abraham Kuyper proposes is that we need to have Christians at the forefront of each sphere. We need to have Christians at the forefront of politics. So we need to have Christian representatives. We could even have Christian presidents. We should have Christians in the military, in that sphere. We should have Christians in education. We should have Christians in arts and in sciences, all for the purpose of reforming that sphere to the glory of God.
Absolutely.
I don't think his ideas are perfect, and I think there's flaws or some weak spots, but I think those are generally good guidelines in how you operate in your many spheres in life.
Because I think it's so complicated of a thing to deal with, of being a Christian in the political sphere, that a lot of times it does feel easier to say, and I don't talk about politics a lot because of this, and sometimes I feel like I just don't want to keep up with it or do any of these things. Dare I say, sometimes I feel like I don't want to worry about voting. I don't want to worry about any of this because ultimately America isn't going to heaven with me, like
right.
Like the government is not good, but my faith, that's what matters, and that's what I should focus on. And even what's funny about this book is it's actually a great book. Is God on America's Side by Erwin W. Letzer. What's so funny about this is a couple weeks ago, I am kind of cleaning out my bookshelf and looking through a few of the things that went, ironically, were some Tim LaHaye books because I didn't realize I've just been given so many books that I just kind of have on the bookshelf, and we did the eschatology series and we were talking about it, and I didn't realize I have like 4 Tim LaHaye books in there, and so I got rid of those and I'm going through, and I just saw the title to this one. And I didn't really know what his answer was, but just the title's God on America's Side. I figured this is probably some like red-blooded, like Republican trying to write a book about why God loves America, and it just, the title made me mad, so I almost got rid of it. But then as we got closer to this, and I was thinking about it, I was like, let me give it a try. And I read it, and it's actually very biblical and very good what it has to say. So it's just funny because that's my attitude a lot of the time, is just stay out of it. Because it's a lot easier. It's a much easier option.
But I think as we're called as Christians, we're supposed to reform every part of our life. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to submit every part of our life to the lordship of Christ. So that includes the touchy subjects. That includes the seemingly unnecessary and meaningless stuff that has to do with Christianity. I mean, politics. That doesn't. When you think of politics, you don't think of religion. You think of politics. But I think as Christians, we're still called to submit politics to God. Mm-hmm. So,
and that's why it's important to have conversations about it, like we're doing, even if you say something wrong, or even if you don't have all the answers. It's important to talk about these things because that's how you work through it. And I think a lot of times we avoid conversations about politics, or we let our political stance and stuff like that take the forefront before our Christianity. We go to either extreme, and I think it's important to find a middle ground. So, kind of in closing, one thing that I think puts into perspective one of the ways that the church, the American church, has participated in nationalism is seen in the way the American church participates in mission work. A lot of times, going to other countries, I've just heard story after story where we can't help, missionaries sent from America can't help but impose the American culture onto the people that they're sharing the gospel with. And so they bring that with them, like the American form of worship and liturgy and all these things. And what's funny is if you look at the Pauline epistles and try to figure out, okay, how do we do this church thing? There's no set standard of music, like genre.
Right.
Like, that's not talked about. Right? And in different cultures, people are going to worship God different ways. Now, there are certain things set in Scripture that are commonalities among all of them. But these commonalities are found in Christ, not in our culture. Okay, so there are things that we all share in common, but there are also things that are going to be very different. All right, and a small tribe in a remote part of Africa is going to worship God a lot differently than a church in America.
Yep.
And that's okay. That's what's beautiful about it. That's the end goal. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation. So here's where patriotism, to a certain extent, can actually be a good thing. Okay, I think about some Christians in Cuba. They love their country, but they hate their government. Okay, so think about that. They love their country, but they hate their government. They love the terrain, the land itself, right? Which don't even get me started on that, because we're going to talk about that in a episode coming soon about heaven and hell and eternity and kind of how earth plays into eternity. But God created this earth, and it's beautiful. And different parts look different, and they're all still great, right? And also, God created the different races and the different cultures, right? And there are good, beautiful things to be found in each culture and their customs. Okay, now when those customs and those cultures become an idol, right, that's nationalism.
Right.
Okay, but there are things in every culture, and it's one of the things that as a church planter, as somebody who wants to be a church planter, you have to keep in mind, figure out where you're going to plant a church, figure out what the culture is, and figure out what things actually translate over into the Christian faith, what things can actually translate over into the gospel. Because there are always going to be parts of a culture, of someone's heritage, that stay intact. And that's okay. Because not every part of any culture or any heritage is inherently evil. Because it's part of God's creation. All right, so we have to be willing to give things up and surrender things to God from our culture and from our heritage. But it's also okay to be proud of it. You know, at the end of the day, I do love my country. I love living in Florida.
I do too. Well, I don't know about living in Florida, but I do love America. I mean, we have freedoms here that we don't. The other places in the world don't have.
Right. Yeah, and I'm proud of kind of this military heritage, having family members that did, you know, really honorable and cool things, like, and that's okay. But is nationalism a sin? The answer is yes, because nationalism is idolatry.
Yes.
Right? And idolatry is a sin. So I think it's been a very interesting conversation. Do you have any closing thoughts?
USA, 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 USA.
I hope everybody had a really fun Independence Day. And again, this has been a really interesting conversation. I don't think we anywhere near like scratched the surface of this. It was a conversation, nothing more. And you're for some reason listening to it. But we thank you for joining us again on Theology Thursday. And we're hoping next week to talk about heaven, hell, and eternity. If we don't, it is coming up soon. It will be this month. So you can check us out on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify. We're finally on Spotify, YouTube, all those great places. So we look forward to, hope you'll join us again next week on Theology Thursday.